great sympathy, I'm sure you do yourself, to political strategists and people inside who are, making decisions very quickly often. And when things go wrong, it can feel a very lonely place inside Number 10. So, they'll probably look at that and think they haven't had a particularly good day, but with a campaign, things come thick and fast to get things back on foot.
But just on that, look, even though, that might have been decided, on the day or in the 24 hours, we've both worked in Downing Street. There are really good teams of people under the Director of Comms, the events teams. We're all, told you don't do a picture with an exit sign behind your principal's head and all that sort of thing. Why was the decision made for him to persist outside when there is this beautiful state-of-the-art kind of press room in Downing Street?
See, I remember building it. That was our thing at the time. Wonderful thing. I'm sure if you went back to them now and said, obviously we should have done things inside the press conference centre. There's a huge, noisy protest outside. It's pouring with rain. The optics of this aren't great when, we're on the back foot already at the launch of this particular campaign. You tend to find often people do what they've always done. So there'll just be a snap thing where the machine will naturally come in and say, we go outside the front of Downing Street. This is where we present things from. This is how we do it. And it just takes somebody to step back and go, actually, let's move away. And I think, again, they'll know they've got something wrong. And I'm sure they'll be kicking themselves more than anyone else because they'll be reading every newspaper and seeing everything. And, it's tough in there when you get it wrong. And we all have, right? We've all made some
listen, I hold my head up, hands up. I've been involved in many a disastrous Labour thing. So absolutely. Sometimes as a former strategist, you sort of think there, but for the grace of God, right? Is it? But interesting what you've said there as well is sometimes when you are in a very pressured situation, you just follow rituals and groupthink in terms of, somebody saying, hang on a minute, should we just take a step back and ask that obvious question? But let's move on from Brollygate. What do you think about the slogan, clear plan, bold action, secure future, compared with something more direct like change? Where do you think the party should be pitching itself on its slogan?
So I think the core element to remember here is, all elections are fundamentally change or more of the same. That's what you're always going to the electorate with. I think, if you look at the work that I've done on this, on focus groups and polling, the things you see, people want change. Fundamentally, that's the mood of the country. People feel for whatever reason that their lives aren't what they want them to be, that they're poorer, that the hospital waiting lists are too high, their schools are crumbling, the water companies. So there's this feel that things aren't working. So people fundamentally want change. I think what's going to be very difficult for the Conservative Party is that they're out campaigning on what fundamentally is a status quo campaign. So the slogan itself, it's, what's our moral story? And that is, we have a plan, let us fix it. I think the electorate at the moment would probably feel, well, we don't think your plan's working. And I think change is a very powerful message. If you look back to 2019, the sentiment was the same, that people, I think, did want change. They felt there was a real stasis, that Brexit was blocking up change to priorities that people wanted again, NHS, crime, all these other things. And we managed to position Boris as the change candidate. He wasn't what had come before him in the Tory party. He was something different. And I think importantly, it's not just the slogans, it's the actions. So as soon as he came in from July, all actions were, we are going to get Brexit done, and then focus on those priorities. And if you look at everything he did, we did do everything we actually could to get Brexit done. And then when we hit that impasse, we went to the public and, we got the majority. But too often, I think people look at what we're saying and not actually what are we doing and what we're delivering. And if you can have the best slogan in the world. If it doesn't match your actual actions, you're not going to win.
And that feeling, as you say, in terms of Boris Johnson, there was a new thing to talk about. I mean, Brexit was a really, really big part of that election. It was a very big part of his story. How damaging is it, do you think, that no flights are going to take off before the election when it has been a really big part of the Conservative message?
I think fundamentally, the question will be: do people believe that if they vote for Conservative, that they will have this reduction in small boats and tackle immigration? And I think without having concrete evidence that this is going, we've delivered something that was, one of the pledges, one of the promises, tied into other things, probably feeling a bit gloomy in people's real lives. I sort of think most people who are very sceptical about politicians anyway will feel, well, I just don't believe it's going to happen. So even if the policy itself was particularly popular, and I'm not sure it is universally popular anyway. I think people were probably very sceptical in its delivery anyway, and now more so the fact that it's been pushed to the side of the election.
Yeah. Well, look, Lee, great to catch up with you. Thank you so much for your time. That's Lee Cain, former Director of Communications to Boris Johnson. So, look, Simon, I'll start with you. What's it like being in the bunker when that decision is made about going to have an election? Just take us through what's it like.
Well, it was a little different, as you remember, in 2010, in that it became pretty obvious that the options for Gordon Brown in terms of timing were limited. So the election date was not a complete surprise. And it was kind of well known in advance the extent these things are. In fact, I almost gave the game away because I did a lobby briefing that morning, and there's the normal question, what's the Prime Minister doing today? And I said, this morning there was a photograph of the cabinet. And I thought, oh my God, I've just given it away. That's what happens on election day. Anyway, what struck me about it was just, and you'll remember, it's the brutality of it. The election is called, the announcement's made, the special advisors, many of whom have become good friends with us, the civil service, disappear. They hand in their phones and they go off. And there's this moment, and it's a bit like when the Prime Minister comes in, of just, you can see the world has changed. And certainly in 2010, different set of calculations, different set of circumstances, but still this same sense of the big divide. The civil servants are left sharpening their pencils. Maybe we'll talk about Purdah, and the special advisors go off and do their political work. So I think it's only when you've worked in Number 10 that you realise just what a significant moment is, because, of course, the Prime Minister has to continue being Prime Minister, even though he or she is out on the campaign trail as well.
And of course, things can happen during an election campaign, and cabinet ministers may well still have to sort of perform a role as they're in that sort of position, being supported by civil servants, particularly if something bad happens or if there's a crisis of some kind. Cleo, what are your memories of when Boris Johnson made that decision to call the election after a very fraught period in British politics around Brexit?
Yeah, I mean, people who will have read about it in later books and articles and stuff will realise that we'd been trying to force an election from about August. That was very much the plan. And to Simon's point, it was very, very strange kind of pushing for an election. And there wasn't so much that sense that we wouldn't be back. We were quite cocky and confident that we could do it. We were up against Jeremy Corbyn and we felt very confident we could beat him. And the whole goal had been trying to force an election, even amongst the kind of chaos and deadlock. And I've noticed Keir Starmer's quite effectively been using this kind of end the chaos, end the deadlock line today. In fact, quite a lot of, I would say, sort of Conservatives 2019 even vote leave from the referendum playbook. A lot of time for change, which always resonates well. And we've had the Tories for 14 years. But this sense of we can't go on any longer, and you can kind of force those conditions, I suppose. I don't think Rishi Sunak's necessarily forced them this time, because his whole thing is stick with me, continuity. But I suppose the interesting bit in all this is that Simon's right. The special advisors, they kind of always know that their time could be over. You always get the sense that it really could end tomorrow. The obvious surprises come to MPs, Conservative MPs, who thought they had summer holidays and they thought they had time to sort of sort nice jobs out for themselves. And I'm sure Rishi Sunak hasn't meant to do them over, but after the way they've behaved towards him in the last couple of years, I think good on him.
Well, it's so funny you say that, Cleo. It does feel a wee bit like Rishi's revenge on all these people that have been kind of, bad mouthing him and slagging him off, and maybe even with the media, because as you say, a lot of Conservative MPs I spoke to yesterday are really down in the dumps about this, because they had, been planning for an October or November election. They were, as you say, trying to sort of think about, finding another job. They're, worried about their future for them and their families. So So I think, one person sort of said to me, well, it's okay for him because he's very wealthy and it'll be fine for him. But I think a lot of them are really worried about the future. Well, look, we'll get Brawleygate out of the way because it is a significant moment from yesterday. A few people messaging in saying, Colin says, to be honest, I think the only people that are interested in the umbrella are the press. What a strange world we live in when this is the main topic of the day. Colin, I do take your point, but the point is, when you're doing a campaign, things become a symbol and things become an optic, and a picture, tells expresses 1,000 words. And no matter where you sit on the political spectrum, nobody would think it was an ideal scenario to be launching a campaign, the fight of your life, and getting absolutely drenched, which then led to all of these headlines across lots of different newspapers. Simon, what do you think went wrong? What would you have done differently had you been director of comms?
Well, it was interesting because when it started, I thought, yeah, this shows a little bit of grit that he's out there in the rain. But of course, the more it rained, the more bedraggled he kind of looked, which was a shame. Probably looking back, doing it inside number 10 would have made more sense, actually. There are challenges with that. People might have said he's calling election from the bunker. You know what? In reality, very few people will actually remember what he said. That's the reality. Everyone was expecting the announcement, so he came out and he made it and he got through it. So I think it's, in a way, the more concerning thing was the Blair anthem, if we can call that, playing in the background. Things can only get better. So there was a kind of clash of the combination of the rain and the Blair Brown anthem. But look, it's the start of a very long campaign. And what we all know is that big mistakes can happen during a campaign across any of the parties. So I think there'll be other things we'll be talking about in the next few weeks that will be seen to be totemic.
Absolutely. Peter says Sunak can't win. He's either the Wally with the Brawley or he's the Wally without the Brawley. Cleo, what would you have done if it had been your man, Boris Johnson, sort of surging forward into the rain? Would you have held him back and said, no, take an umbrella, or would you have directed him off to the media suite to do the announcement inside?
Oh yeah, God. I mean, if he'd been out in the rain, you probably would have seen bubbles from his shampoo that morning, not washed out properly or something. I actually think the point that Sunak can't win on this is right. He either would have looked like Mary Poppins with his umbrella, or maybe if you're very keen on him, you'd have thought he looked like sort of President Bartlett in the West Wing when he's out in the rain. But you're right, there is this multi-million-pound media studio for exactly this kind of thing. I wonder whether there were conversations, to Simon's point about talking about Purdah, that, can you strictly announce what can you say in your speech if it's physically in the building that could sound a bit political and doesn't sound neutral? Although, as it turns out, no one could hear what he said anyway because of the blaring. But why not at least give him a mic on his lapel? Then we would have heard him. I think it's small things like that.
And also, it's probably, there was part of me actually that did feel sorry for him because, that's one of the most important moments of his political career. And you want to have the space, you want to have the quiet to be able to make the announcement. It is hard when you're battling a lot of noise and you're out in the elements. I mean, there was actually part of me that did feel for him. Look, in the time that we've got, let's move on to, what's very important in a campaign, and that is the slogan. Cleo, I'll just come to you, which, take back control from the Leave campaign, get Brexit done. I mean, listeners will be in no surprise that I was not a huge Boris Johnson fan, but he was very good at the slogan, very good at the slogan. How important is the slogan in a general election campaign?
I mean, I'm not a comms expert. Simon will have to correct me probably on this, but it's quite telling that people remember those kind of sets of 3 words really well. I do think both for Labour and the Conservatives, they've improved what their slogans were at the party conferences, where all I remember is something about a brighter future in both of them, but it was like a load of garbage that had obviously come up in focus groups. So they've obviously refined what they've needed to say, and they've got a few key lines in there, but is essentially time for change, which is always really powerful. It pretty much works every time if you can make that case, and it's very, very hard to say stick with me
Yeah.
for another 14 years, and yet at the same time, like, ignore what's come in the last few years
Yeah.
with Liz and Boris
Mm.
Johnson.
And Simon, what